When you suspect a thyroid problem, what actually needs to be tested? Now, contrary to popular belief, it is not TSH. In fact, TSH has nothing to do with your thyroid, and particularly nothing to do with your thyroid function. We'll get into that later. What tests do you actually need? All right, before I list the test, in case you are doing anything and you're unable to write these down or you feel like I'm going too fast, no worries. Check out the link below. Click that link, you'll get a download of exactly what these tests are that need to be ordered. Okay, so what are the tests? They are free T3, free T4, reverse T3, anti-TG, and anti-TPO. Okay, now in reverse order, let's go through these. What is anti-TPO? TPO stands for thyroid peroxidase. This is an enzyme that is made by your thyroid gland. This is part of how thyroid hormones are made. Like part of that whole process requires this enzyme. And it is natural for your body also to make antibodies to thyroid peroxidase. However, what is not wanted and what indicates an autoimmune uh, attack against the thyroid is when those antibodies are higher than they should be. Now, what is should be? Well, it depends on whatever the reference range is for the test that you're having done. Oftentimes, when we're talking reference ranges, it's possible for those to fall into different categories, and it's possible for those to evolve over time based on things like sample prep and then also assay. How lots of times it's so I'm going to step over into the pharma world here for a second. Lots of times, especially in pharma, we are using equipment like HPLC. So this is high performance liquid chromatography, and we're looking at specific wavelengths. And for the molecules that we're interested in, oftentimes they absorb at multiple wavelengths. And so you pick the one that kind of gives you the best signal to noise. And it's the same thing regardless of whether you're doing HPLC or whether you're doing ELISA or whatever you're doing on a biologic enzyme like TPO. It's possible to whatever detect. So there's two things typically that play into it. Is sample prep, is there a dilution scheme involved, etc. And then also how is it being detected? Uh, what is the standard measurement range for the detector that's being used? So those kind of play into it. So what we were focused less on an actual value and more focused on, is it less than whatever the upper limit is for that reference range? Because for anti-TPO antibodies, these are written as less than whatever the limit is. That is the reference range. There is no bottom number on the reference range. And if you are higher than, so now you're greater than, not lesser than, whatever that value is, then it's an indication that you have an autoimmune attack going on against your thyroid gland. High anti-TPO alone is sufficient to diagnose Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I'm going to repeat that. High anti-TPO alone, so this is even when your total T3 is normal, even when your total T4 is normal, even when your free T3, free T4, and TSH are all normal, doesn't matter. If that anti-TPO is high, it indicates an autoimmune attack on the thyroid. It is most commonly elevated in conditions of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. What is Hashimoto's thyroiditis? Hashimoto's thyroiditis is an autoimmune attack against the thyroid, in which case thyroid function is decreased. So thyroid function is lower than it is in a healthy individual. The medical term for that is hypo meaning low, thyroid, so hypothyroid. So another term for Hashimoto's thyroiditis is autoimmune hypothyroid. All right, moving on. to anti-TG. Thyroglobulin is another enzyme, or it's actually a protein in the thyroid that is, once again, very involved in production of thyroid hormones. And it's possible for once again, there are normal levels of antibodies against thyroglobulin. However, they should once again be less than whatever the reference range is. Now, when anti-TG antibodies are high, this may point to this may point to Hashimoto's, or it may point to Graves' disease. Now, what is Graves' disease? Graves' disease is autoimmune so high thyroid function. So it's high, you are overproducing, your thyroid gland is being overstimulated to produce more hormones than it should because there's an autoimmune attack on it. So that's what Graves' disease is. If anti-TG alone is high, it warrants further investigation to figure out if it's Graves or if it's Hashimoto's. However, it points to an autoimmune thyroid condition. At this point, I think it's also, I hate to say fairly common, but at this point, I think that it is more typical for doctors to also look at or order additional imaging just to make sure everything looks okay especially when that high anti-TG is seen. Now, it is possible, especially for Hashimoto's, to have a seronegative case of Hashimoto's. And this is where the anti-TG and the anti-TPO antibodies are in the normal range. Seronegative Hashimoto's is diagnosed typically by ultrasound. With Hashimoto's specifically, and I speak more to this because I myself have been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, and I have put much more research into Hashimoto's than I have into Graves' disease. So I'm going to turn the tables to Hashimoto's. With Hashimoto's, by ultrasound, it is common to see swollen lymph nodes or enlarged lymph nodes. And the reason for that is there is lymph involvement. So we often think of Hashimoto's as just being attack against the thyroid gland. It is not. There is a huge amount of lymph involvement. One of the symptoms of Hashimoto's is also Hashimoto's encephalitis. So this is actually inflammation of the brain due to Hashimoto's, due to that autoimmune attack on the thyroid. So with all of that, what is common again by ultrasound is enlarged lymph nodes. Okay, switching over to free T3 and free T4. T4 is okay, your thyroid gland actually makes 5 different hormones. And of those, we commonly talk about T3 and T4. T4 is considered the inactive or storage form because it is converted to T3, which is highly active, or it is converted to reverse T3. Reverse T3 binds to the same receptors as T3, and it is a way for the body to protect itself in the event of starvation, for instance, because you kind of want to shut off metabolism and help conserve the body when you have starvation. And so it's a way of lowering metabolism. We're often told that reverse T3 is inert. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I imagine we just don't know the full extent of its biological activity yet. The key takeaway for this is if you have high levels of reverse T3, it's going to block T3 from attaching to the thyroid receptors and actually allowing you to feel good ultimately, because the reverse T3 is blocking the activity of T3, which is the active molecule. Now, that's not to say T4 is not important. T4 is very important, and there's actually something we're not going to get into much today, although I'm going to touch on it right here, is a protein that's circulating in the bloodstream known as thyroid binding globulin. So this is the short for this, the abbreviation for this is TBG, stands for thyroid binding globulin. The T actually stands for thyroxin, which thyroxin is T4. That's the full name of T4 hormone. However, it will also bind T3. So we just call it, for ease of understanding this conversation, we're just going to call it thyroid binding globulin because it binds both. And this is what the levels of that protein in the bloodstream are what alter. They account for the difference between free levels of T3 and T4 and total levels of T3 and T4, because the difference, so total minus free equals the amount of either T3 or T4 that is bound by TBG or another protein in the bloodstream, because albumin and a few other proteins will also bind to thyroid hormone. Okay, let's see. So, before we leave reverse T3, so you want your reverse T3 to be in range. If it is high, you are likely struggling. It's possible to struggle with hypo, so low thyroid symptoms, if reverse T3 is high, because once again, it is blocking the thyroid receptors and preventing binding of T3 in those receptors. And every cell in your body needs thyroid hormone for proper function. Okay, free T3 and free T4. Both of these you want to be in range. And typically it would say not just in range. If they are at the low end of the range, it may still indicate that you are, struggling with hypo. And here's the other thing. This is where I'm going to pull in Ayurveda here for just a second. The other thing about this, and the reason why I bring in Ayurveda, is because Ayurveda sees the body as layered. So we have the plasma layer, which feeds the overflow from the plasma layer, fuels the red blood cells, which then fuels each of the underlying tissues. So why bring this up? Well, because ultimately, even if all of your levels are normal, it doesn't mean that you aren't dealing with a hypothyroid symptoms. And the reason for that is because what's in the blood is one thing, what's actually getting out of the bloodstream and into the tissues is something altogether different. And that is not measured on a blood test. How well thyroid hormones get out of the bloodstream and into the body's tissues depend on a host of other things, most notably regulated cortisol levels and proper nutrition. So your mineral balance needs to be balanced, like your minerals within your body need to be balanced. And I would go so far to say as essential vitamins also need to be well balanced as well. And how do I know, like, where do I get this from, that you can be hypothyroid within your tissues, even when your blood test, especially for free T3 and free T4 normal? Well, it's because integrative medicine practitioners and doctors in the know actually perform additional tests to evaluate thyroid function. One of those tests being a reflex test, the second of those tests being a basal metabolic rate. And so both of those give additional information about how well that thyroid hormone is getting out of your bloodstream and into your body cells. All right, so we talked about a lot in this short episode. 4 more, if you want more about this, like more on the cortisol connection, more on things we didn't even touch on, like insulin connection with all of this, be sure to click that link below to find out more about my live program, From Gaslit to Resilient. This is a 6-week program where we talk about the hormone lattice, so the interconnection between the hormones that make you tick, which are thyroid, insulin, and cortisol. These are 3 hormones of energy conversion. Energy, of course, at the end of the day is so important for life, because without energy, we die. So in that program, we're talking about the hormone lattice, which again are these three hormones of energy conversion, the hormones that make you tick: thyroid, insulin, and cortisol. And we're talking about how to support balance between these three. And ultimately, that allows structure for balance of all of the other hormones within your body. If you are someone who has been struggling with symptoms for a while and you are so frustrated with hearing that uh, your lab work's normal, we can't do anything for you. This program is for you. Click that link below to save your spot.